Welcome back to the ChurchBiz podcast. My name is Josh Reeves, and I'm your host. And I'm joined today by Melissa Stephan. And Melissa's a part of the ChurchBiz team. She leads ChurchBiz HR. Melissa, welcome. It's great to have you on the podcast.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's
Sorry.
good to have you. No, you're good. Why don't you start just by giving us a brief intro of who you are and tell us a little bit about what you do with ChurchBiz HR?
Yeah, great. I will try and make it brief. Sometimes it's hard to get all that in a nutshell, but well, first and foremost, I would say I'm a wife. I have a husband named Jeremy, and I'm a mom to two kids. I have a 10-year-old son, Jace, and a 7-year-old daughter, Camry. So we're right. I mean, they're just great ages. We're right in the middle of that. We currently live in Knoxville. We moved here about 3 years ago. My husband's a lifelong Vols fan, which is, if you are in this area and you are not, that's a big problem. And so I just like to tell people I kind of married into it. Human resources. I guess I initially got into it because I just have a passion for helping people. I'm a people person, if you will. And that, coupled with my experience in education, has really led me to this field. With ChurchBiz specifically, I provide a range of human resources support to my current clients that includes everything from benefits administration to job descriptions, employee manuals, compliance, and even some like team dynamic and relationship issues. I think that answered all the questions. That's about the snapshot
Yeah, no, that's
for
great.
that.
Yeah, the Vols are having a good season this year too, I think, right? They're doing pretty good.
They're doing pretty good. Last year was kind of epic. So, we'll see how this year turns out, but we're excited. And it's just when you live in this area and the team is doing well. And honestly, even when the team wasn't doing well, it's still, there's just such a community around it. So we're
Yeah,
having a good time enjoying the wins while we're here. So,
yeah, that's awesome. Well, I wanted to have you on the podcast because we work with a lot of churches at ChurchBiz, and there's a lot of confusion at times on HR related issues. A lot of churches I work with aren't even aware of some of the things they need to be watching out for, as far as HR employee compliance, payroll issues, retirement accounts, all those sorts of things. And so I think you've been such a blessing to ChurchBiz in bringing that expertise. We always kind of know the payroll side of it enough to set it up, but we don't always have the expertise to answer, hey, is this a qualified health plan, or is this a qualified retirement plan? Or even to get into some of the things you mentioned, like giving insight and feedback on roles and consulting on, making sure we're following through all the policies. So I thought it'd be great to have you on and just kind of ask you some of the questions that I commonly run into with churches, and just hear from you and give some free advice on the podcast. So I wanted to start with this question. As I mentioned, some of the churches don't even know what they don't know about HR and compliance. So what are some of the major HR compliance issues that churches need to watch out for? And I'll just stop there. I'll let you answer kind of your thoughts on that.
yeah, you kicked it off a little bit with retirement plans, and I've had a couple of these recently, so I think I'll start there. There are a lot of options. There are a lot of retirement plan options out there. And what I'm finding is the lack of knowledge on the front end has gotten these churches into some really expensive plans with some really unnecessary compliance work with that has a tangible cost because somebody has to do it, but also just like a burden to the organization that's unnecessary. I would say aside from that, I would think benefit offerings and deductions, how to apply those fairly, make sure, you're applying them across the board to everybody who falls sort of in the same category. A lot of nonprofit organizations, they don't know that in order to make those deductions from their employee on a pre-tax basis, that they have to have like a cafeteria plan or a Section 125 plan, which those are just, fancy ways to say that there's some compliance work that goes with that.
Yeah.
They're not difficult, and it doesn't take a lot even to get them established, but they should be there. And then there's sort of an annual upkeep of that. I would say another one is policy creation, and these two probably go hand in hand. It's like policy creation and then an understanding of federal and state labor laws, and those feed into each other. Smaller organizations, they don't have to abide by a lot of those, but as the organization grows in staff size or team size, They need to start thinking about, okay, what do we have to do? Are there certain federal and state labor laws that we have to comply with, or even anti-discrimination laws that come into play as the organizations get bigger?
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, even you mentioning those things, I'm thinking back. So I helped plant our church that I'm a part of, and when we first started, we had no idea. It's not like in seminary or in church planter training that someone tells you, "Hey, you need to think about all these things." I wish they would. That'd actually be a great class for pastors in seminary.
It would be.
But and so we found out a lot of that stuff 5 or 6 years in and realized, we oh gosh, we don't have an employee policy manual. We don't, how do we? What's our process for hiring, or what can we do retirement wise? Thankfully, we connected with Guidestone, and they kind of helped us a little bit. But still, a lot of those things you're mentioning, I work with churches that they're just deducting money and thrown into who knows what kind of account, and it's kind of like you have to look into that and get some expert help on that. So I think that's really helpful, and just even remind those who are listening, like, you're here to give that kind of consultation. That's part of your partnership with ChurchBiz, is to be able to look at a church and advise them on, hey, you need to watch out for this, or hey, your plan isn't qualified, so you can't do it pre-tax. So that's really really helpful stuff, and hopefully those listening, even some of these things, you might not even be familiar with it, but you can start to realize, hey, if you don't recognize some of these things, you probably need to reach out to get help on, hey, look into our church. What do we need? Are we doing something that's going to get us in trouble if things go, poorly with an employee, or we, have compliance issues? So good. That's really helpful. Any other issues? You mentioned retirement and having the right kind of account to be able to offer fairly to all employees, policies and procedures. Any other things you see as you're working with churches that are kind of glaring blind spots?
I think those are most of them. I think just, you know, as an organization, and I'm sure there'll be an opportunity to get into this a little bit later, but when the organization is small and you have like one staff member or one team member and it's the lead pastor and they're just, planting their flag and they're getting the church up and running, a lot of those things are not applicable. And what I find is the organization grows at a rate that it's difficult to keep up with some of those things while you're still moving, the ship forward. And so I think that is maybe the piece that I would add of just like, that is why we're here. That's why ChurchBiz is here, is to help deal with those administrative things or payroll, or I mean, I always hate to say the business side of things, but to some extent that, so that the church can still drive the bus forward or move forward in the mission of the church while these other things are being handled, and take some of the burden and frustration away from the church staff and the church leaders.
Yeah, that's really good. And is there a point in the development of a church, say for church planters, that you say, hey, definitely by that time you add that second employee, or, is there like a threshold where you say, hey, this is when you really need to make sure you have these things in place?
Yeah, I think a couple of those pieces can be from day one. A job description and an offer letter, like I would do that no matter how many employees you have, because number one, it gives the employee or the team member, hey, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. If I'm successful in this, this is what that looks like. And it also gives the governing body, whether it's deacons or elders or an executive leadership team, all of these denominations and churches kind of call it have a different term for it. So whatever that is, it gives them the opportunity to hold that person accountable, but also say, yeah, we agree for this church to move forward. Like, here's what would be good for this person to do. So things like that, I think, day one. When you start talking about like a full policy manual and some of those things, I think when you're creeping up 3, 4, 5 employees, it's really good to have that. I feel like there's a lot of flexibility and paid time off and benefits and all of that kind of stuff until they start hitting those larger, numbers of 3 staff members, 4 staff members, 5 staff members. Ironically, for like health insurance to get a group plan, it's usually 2 or more. And so from a benefit standpoint, if you're talking about any sort of group coverage, it would be that 2 number.
Okay. That's really helpful. I think that's wise, even for, younger church or smaller churches or church plants, to hear that. and even starting with a job description, that's so help even for them as they're working to have a little, you don't always have someone over you telling you what to do when you're planting, and to have that job description that reminds you, hey, this is what I'm here for, this is what I need to be committing my time to. Really, really wise even on the practical end of that. And if I understand correctly, if someone is saying, I need help with that, I need, I've got maybe two or three staff, I've got my own, uh, I need some consulting with that. That is something you offer, right, through ChurchBiz HR. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I've had a lot of people call me over the course of the last, ever since we sort of launched this. And sometimes it's, hey, I'm just going to tell you, you don't, this is kind of what you need, or I can help you, and this is what that looks like. And so I take each church or each organization as they come, because it's not really a one size fits all. There's so much that's just ingrained in the mission of the church and just the culture of that particular church. And so I always start with, well, let me talk to you first. Let's have a conversation, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, and I love that because you sometimes probably can discern the things that they don't even see, that they need help seeing that they need those. So that's such a blessing. You mentioned health insurance, which I'm sure is, even in a smaller church, going to be on the radar. It's, huge, huge cost in our society, huge burden at times. But let's say a church is at that point where they've got two people on staff and they're starting to explore that. What does that process kind of look like if they were to reach out to you?
Yeah, great. It's sort of a necessary thing, but also really costly. I love that you said if they have two, because I think I would make the caveat of, like, if you're a church with, a one staff member or one individual, I couldn't necessarily help with that. I could direct you to somebody or say, hey, you're going to go on the marketplace and find medical insurance. When you hit that two number, you're eligible for some group plans. And I think helping churches administer their benefits and find affordable options, or really as affordable as possible, is a skill set of mine. At the end of the day, the benefits that are provided are really paid for with tithe money. And I think it's helpful and maybe even necessary to help alleviate the cost as much as possible, so that those funds can be used elsewhere and really for the mission of the church. And so that's one of the things I love to do. I obviously can't pick the rates, but I can say there's more than what you have right now, and let's just see what's out there. And then the churches that I have helped with that specific issue, they just feel, one, a little bit of a sense of relief, and then two, like, if nothing comes back better or less expensive, at least they feel good about the decision that they're making, and they can make it with integrity and say, hey, look, we reviewed 15 options, and this really was the best one out of the 15 options that we reviewed.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and I think what you're mentioning there, that's a good practice of stewardship, to make sure that, hey, the money we're spending is getting the best policy for the best rate. Our local church is in process, I think, of working with you to help us make sure that, hey, is what we have a good thing, or is there better options out there that could better bless our employees and be a better stewardship of our money? So thank you for that work. And
Yeah.
I know there's several churches I can think of that I work with as a client service rep who definitely need that help, and would greatly benefit from that. So, another thing that often run into, and we've mentioned a little bit, is retirement and benefits in that end.
Mm.
And if you're not a financial person, a lot of you start throwing around 403b and 401k, and a lot of people, a lot of pastors especially, not to throw them under the bus, but that's just not their passion. That's not the background they come from most of the time. But one of the things you can do is help them navigate both a qualified plan, if I understand correctly, and then something that is trusted, that they can help build a plan for the whole organization. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think, to some extent, it obviously depends on the organization and what they're looking for. There are some times, although very rarely, where like a 401k plan is going to be the best option for a church.
Mm,
It could be for a nonprofit, but for churches, just from a fees and compliance standpoint, most of the time that's not going to be the best option. So from my standpoint, I will help them, figure out where they can go and what the plan offerings look like. and then help drive the process. That can look a variety of different ways depending on, again, the organization, but helping maybe to educate the leadership team on like, hey, here's a couple of options and here's the fees. And then helping with the paperwork and obviously getting the plan implemented. It's usually a one-time project, like, hey, let's get everything up and running, and then you guys can take it from there. However, because of the uniqueness with churches, sometimes there's not a staff person that's on staff that can do like monthly uploads or monthly contribution uploads to everybody's accounts. And so in those situations, sometimes ChurchBiz, the accounting and payroll side can step in. Sometimes I can step in and do that. So I really think we have an opportunity to help no matter which, phase of that you fall into. I also would just say, and this is maybe more of a personal passion of mine, but I think that education around the retirement realm is really important. So I generally encourage the organizations to have like annual or every other year education specifically about like retirement, the importance of contributing regularly, and the importance of contributing as early as you can. Some of the churches that I'm working with, their pastors are getting in the 50s and, maybe even 55, and they don't have anything set aside for retirement. And I think that's a disservice to those individual pastors, but also just the rest of their team. And it's a simple, you mentioned Guidestone earlier. I work with them on a variety of the churches that I work with. They're amazing, and they will come do that education virtually or on site, depending on where you're at no additional cost to the organization. And so it's just a tool and a resource that's out there that could be utilized.
Wow, that's really, really helpful information. And I think just even thinking back to when I was planting and trying to find some of these, I kind of had enough knowledge to know, hey, you need to explore insurance, you need to explore retirement at some point. But when you just kind of search on Google, it's really difficult to discern, like, what is this? Is this good? Is this bad? And it's such a blessing to these churches to have the opportunity to ask you to help them with that. And so I'm really thankful for that. And I could see how that would be a huge burden relief to have someone who's like, hey, this is a good plan, or here's your 15, or however many health options, and just such a blessing to churches. So I'm kind of already hitting at this next question. I don't want to answer for you, but how do you see, when you kind of bring the spiritual side of things, as you're working with churches, how do you see God at work through this particular work of HR on behalf of those churches?
Oh, yeah. Oh man, I have spent a lot of years like processing this. And if I'm honest, there have been seasons in my life or times in my life where I'm asking myself, like, am I supposed to be doing this? Like, what am I doing? I think we all need to reassess and ask that question from time to time, because I think there's something valuable just in the exercise of going back through that. But I've spent the last, decade plus providing these same skill sets. And I've truly leaned into it as like a calling on my life. It's not fancy. Actually, a lot of times it's a little bit messy, but I firmly believe that I'm gifted and should be utilizing these skills. And the fact that I get to do it in this church realm or with these nonprofits actually blows me away. I think there's a real need there. And I think that I'm able to provide a level of knowledge, even the level of like, look, I've looked at all of these options, so I can break it down for you guys at a very affordable cost without them having to spend their time on it. Um, and then I think, just in the most basic sense of all of that, Jesus is all about relationships. And I think what I bring to the table is my genuine love for people and relationships. It's absolutely a driving force behind what I do. Do I always get it right? No. But I do think it's a factor in my decisions and in the decisions that churches have to make. And I can bring that unique aspect of, okay, well, let's think about how this is going to impact your team. Or if we make this policy, how that's going to play out in the culture of the staff that you have. So I would say those two things. Really, it's a calling for me. And then I just really value people and relationships.
Yeah, that's so good. And when these things go wrong in a church and they in a a staff policy isn't there and conflict breaks out, or we don't have the retirement in place and we get to our 50s and 60s and it's a bad situation, or any of the, or health insurance is, we're paying way too much, or we have a bad policy, that can really cause a lot of pain. So there's it's cool to see your work doing an immediate impact on those churches where, like, I'm sure there's just pastors and church leaders that are just like, they can breathe easy because they know, like, you're here, you're helping, and they trust you. They sense that from you. And so, yeah, thank you for that work that you're doing. And it is incredibly valuable. Sometimes the administrative gift in the church can feel more ordinary, but it is such a blessing to have people who are gifted administratively and to know, hey, there's people who are gifted in other ways, maybe in teaching and vision and big picture and all these, more abstract things. But if you don't have the administration, if you don't have your ducks in a row, all of that can be shortcut in a heartbeat, and you really need all of it. And so that's a great picture of you using your gifts in the body of Christ to bless in a really, especially in our culture where it is, there's a lot of administration that needs to happen in the church to function well in our country, and that's just a huge blessing. So I'm so glad that you're a part of the ChurchBiz team, and great to talk with you about this. Before I go to Funtime, which I always try to do Funtime on the podcast, do you have any other things that you had in your notes that we didn't cover, or I want to give you one last chance to share anything else you want to say?
Yeah, just one last thing. I think some churches, smaller organizations, the people that are church planting might listen to the first part of this podcast and it's going to be like really overwhelming. Because we're talking about things that honestly they don't want to do because they're really just like, we're going to plant a church and we're going to tell people about Jesus. So this just feels so burdensome and overwhelming for them. But I think the one thing I would say is that there is flexibility and it doesn't have to be overwhelming. So, you have a church plant in the early days, one lead pastor, creating a core group, helpful for him to have a job description or compensation letter or some sort of, something like we discussed earlier. That then I think after that, like policies and policy manuals and benefits, those things come as the organization ages. I think that's something really unique about this partnership is that we grow or can grow with the organization. So the needs of a 1 to 2 team members is going to look very different than some of the churches or organizations that we work with that have like 20 plus team members. And I think just knowing that, yes, we've laid a ton of stuff out there, but there's really flexibility. And sometimes it's one of the first questions I ask sometimes when I get on these calls is like, okay, tell me about the pain points that you're feeling, because that's what we can hit first. And yeah, all this other stuff is really great, but let's deal with what's causing you, anxiety, frustration, sleepless nights, and then see where we land after that.
Yeah, that's really good. Such good information. Hopefully, churches will hear this and take advantage of that and reach out to you. I'll give the info to contact you both at the end of the podcast and then in the notes. I'll make sure to have that. It's all over our website too if you go to churchbiz.com. So Funtime. We always like to do Funtime in the podcast. And at first, I thought politics, but then I thought, oh, there's an election coming up. Might not be the wisest move. I'm just kidding. We're not going to do politics. But I thought, you're in Knoxville. Seems like a cool city in Tennessee, and I'd love to hear, what are the top 3 restaurant recommendations you have for someone visiting Knoxville?
Oh, it's so good. I think the food here is incredible. Now, I lived in St. Louis for a long time, and the food in St. Louis is incredible too. But there's a restaurant downtown called Cafe. It's phenomenal. Foothills Milling Company. It's a little bit actually outside of Knoxville. And then a place called Peaceful Side Social. If I'm going somewhere and we're having like a place to eat, it's one of those 3 places. They're all really different, but amazing food and just like fun areas to explore, walk around. The Peaceful Side Social one has like a great outdoor area, all those things. So I would probably say one of those 3.
That's awesome. Do you guys do barbecue in Knoxville? We invented barbecue in Texas, in my opinion. We kind of run it. Do y'all do barbecue there?
Well, so here's the thing. I lived in St. Louis and there's like St. Louis barbecue. And then I lived close to Memphis and there's Memphis barbecue.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's great barbecue here, but after I've lived in St. Louis and I've lived in Memphis, I would pick different restaurants here.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, like, we might have to have a conversation about Texas barbecue later.
Yeah. Well, when you come to visit, we'll direct you to some great Texas barbecue, which when we say barbecue, we're also talking about brisket. I know in St.
Oh,
Louis and Memphis, it's ribs talk and kind of pork. It's going to be brisket here. So that's what Texas is kind of, you got to have Texas brisket. So anyways, it's good stuff. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, Melissa, and lots of valuable information. For those listening, I'll put the info on the podcast link to contact Melissa if you're interested in getting some help on some of these things. And we'll send you to our webpage. We'll send you to her email, and hopefully you can explore how ChurchBiz HR can help your church. And so that's all I have for now. Melissa, thanks again, and
no
have a
worries.
wonderful day.